Hello everybody, my name is Haj, and in today's video I will talk about F-mount lens compatibility with the FTZ adapter. Basically, if you can use a lens on your DSLR camera, and then it means it will also fit on the FTZ adapter, and therefore you can also then use it on your Z camera. Focus picking should be always available once you are on the manual focus mode. Same thing for image stabilization if you have VR on your lens and or in-body image stabilization in your camera. The question that most people ask, however, is will the lens autofocus or not on a Z camera? Long story short, if the name of the lens starts with AF-S or AF-P or AF-I, then congratulations, your lens is fully compatible with the FTZ adapter. It will autofocus with your Z camera. Other lenses, on the other hand, can still be used, of course, in manual focus mode. That is kind of the summary, but if you want to know more about it, and then please keep watching. The topic about Nikon autofocus lens is a little bit confusing, even back in the days of DSLR camera, because actually Nikon produced two types of autofocus F-mount lenses. First of all, there are the autofocus F-mount lenses without built-in autofocus motors. The name of those lenses start with AF without dash and without the third letter, and almost all of them have 5-pin connectors. So lenses like this Nikon IF-DC Nikkor 135mm f2D lens actually become just a manual focus lens once you use it with a camera without built-in autofocus motors on them. Camera which does not have a built-in autofocus motors are entry-level DSLR cameras such as the Nikon D3000 series and the Nikon D5000 series, but also unfortunately all the Nikon Z camera. Therefore, lens like this one will not autofocus on the Z camera. Another famous and cheap autofocus Nikon lens, which does not have a built-in autofocus motor, is also the 50mm 1.8D lens. That lens will also not gonna autofocus then on Z cameras. On the other hand, there are autofocus F-mount lenses which have a built-in autofocus motors in them. The name of those lenses start with AF and then followed by a dash and then a third letter. The first generation of those lenses was the AF-I lenses, and then the next generation was the AF-S lenses. Most of the autofocus Nikon lenses with built-in autofocus motor that you will find nowadays are AF-S lenses, and the third autofocus lens that have a built-in autofocus motors in them is actually the AF-P lenses, which is geared mainly toward videographer. So those lenses, such as this AF-S Nikkor 70-200mm 2.8G Mark II, have at least 7 pin connectors on them. So those lenses with a built-in autofocus motor will then autofocus on any DSLR and Nikon Z camera. But how about AF-D lenses? Maybe you heard about AF-D lenses. Actually, Nikon does not have an AF-D lenses. Maybe this name comes from a Canon user and then has been then transposed in the Nikon world, because Canon have an AFD autofocus lenses, and maybe also because of the fact that actually Nikon have type D lenses. Type D lenses are like this one, like this 135 millimeters D lens, but also such as this big beast, the 600 millimeters f4 D Mark II version. The letter D actually does not have anything to do with autofocus. If your lens is a type D lens, and then it means that your camera will be able then to use the 3D matrix metering to evaluate the scene. However, because all the new lenses are able to do such things, that actually Nikon dropped this D naming. There are also type G lenses and type E lenses. Again, the letter G or the letter E does not have anything to do with autofocus. Basically, the letter G means that aperture diaphragm of the lens is actually controlled electronically by the camera. Like for example, this 50 millimeters 1.8 G lens. On the other hand, for the type E lens, like this IFS Nikkor 105 1.4 E lens, the aperture diaphragm is controlled electromagnetically by the camera. But in addition to autofocus lenses, Nikon also have plenty of manual focus lenses that you can adapt on the Nikon Z camera using the FTZ adapter. Like for example, here I have my tilt shift 24 millimeters 3.5 D lens. Like all any other tilt shift lens, it is a manual focus lens. So of course it's also then a manual focus lens on the Z camera. However, it is actually easier to use on the Z camera because of the focus picking function. Image stabilization will be available also with this lens. Because actually the lens have a built-in CPU on them. You know, lenses with integrated CPU with the presence of the pin connector on them. However, if you have a lens like this old 800 millimeters 5.6 lens, which does not have, I will show it to you, it does not have a pin connectors on its mount. In order to benefit from the internal image stabilization of the camera, you will have then to enter the focal length of the lens in the non-CPU list. So that's it for Nikon F-mount lenses. But how about third-party lenses? Care need to be taken when you actually buy third-party lenses for your Z camera, because Nikon is actually quite notorious when it comes to third-party accessory compatibilities. Like for example, when they released the Nikon D5300, lots of Sigma lens actually ended up losing their autofocus capabilities. Another example as well are like old batteries, which is not compatible with the D500 and the D850 cameras. So I would say maybe the best bet will be to get lenses that actually you can upgrade their firmware. You can do that, for example, for the Sigma Art and the Sigma Contemporary and the Sigma Sport lenses using the USB dock. I think Tamron also have like what they call tap-in console. I think it's also able to upgrade the firmware of the lens. And I think some other a brand like Yongnuo also provide the ability to upgrade the firmware of the lens. Of course, that will depend then on the manufacturer if they will release a new firmware, and then you will be able then to hopefully use autofocus with your autofocus lenses. The first rule, if you will get a third-party lenses that you will adapt with your Z camera, is to check if the lens have more than 5 pins connectors on them. If it have 5 pins or less, and then definitely it will not autofocus with your Z camera. If it has more than 5 pins, and then yes, maybe it will, maybe it's not, but it's gonna be for you then to test if it works or not. For example, I heard that some of the Tamron lenses behave unexpectedly when used with a Z camera. However, I have here my Tamron 90mm 2.8 VC macro lens, and it works nicely with my Z9. And as I shown before, I have here my 180mm 3.5 Tamron lens, and this lens does not have a built-in autofocus motor. So this lens is then just a manual focus on the Z camera. However, for macro photography, I focus manually most of the time anyway, and it's even now easier to use with the focus picking capability of the Z9 plus the in-body image stabilization. I made a video on why I decided to sell my 180 2.8 OS Sigma lens and just kept the Tamron lens if you are interested in macro photography. Basically, that lens is a very expensive lens. However, I do not really use most of the function that it has since I had my Z9, so I decided to sell it. And I think that's concluded for this video, and stay tuned. I'm still gonna upload a couple of more movies about the Z9 and the F mount lenses. And until next time then, bye.